Okay, everybody, what I'm talking about here really is the psychology of marking. I've marked a lot of scripts. You'll be submitting a script on exam day to a person, believe it or not. And I think that this area is important for you. The first impression that you give to your marker on upon receipt of your script. In other words, what's the first thing that your marker sees in your T4 report? And I'll go through the detail in a moment, but I think that marking scripts is a pretty tough business, and I think that what your marker will do when they get their batch of scripts through to them, whether or not they're PC based or handwritten, what they'll do is that they'll skim the whole script. And certainly that's what I do, and I've talked to other markers across other professional bodies, and it's not uncommon for a skim to take place, literally from start to finish. And what that does for a marker, it gives you a feel for what you're going to be doing over the next hour or 45 minutes or whatever. So and by skimming you can get a good idea. So what's the first thing you see? Well, the first thing you see is the page 1, page 2, etc. Okay, so I think that in terms of the psychology of marking, that first impression is going to give the marker a feel for what type of person you are. And I appreciate that this slide is a little bit unusual, this picture here, but perhaps there is an element of trust in it. In other words, what have you got to offer? How have you started? Uh, so in terms of specifics here, let's say broadly speaking, we've got a page 1 and a page 2. It might not work out exactly like this depending on how you work, but let's assume this for the moment. Page 1, obviously we've got our title and our contents and our appendix. Page 2, we've got our introduction, let's say, which will be 2 paragraphs, and we're certainly going to have an industry example in there. We need to have one. In fact, funnily enough, Nick calls it diversity crime. In other words, if you exclude an industry example, and I have seen this, if you exclude an industry example from your introduction, Nick calls it a crime, and it is a crime because we're going to get 1 mark for doing that. Okay, so broadly speaking, we're talking about 2 pages. This is what I would expect you to have in them, and it's important that you get this right. Okay, now in terms of an example, a pretty simple example, I'm going to show you one just now. I'm also going to show you a bad example from a real script. No personal details in there, but a real script that I have marked and what not to do. So let's start with the the upside first, the good example. Okay, so this is page 1. Okay, so we've got our title there, pretty straightforward. Okay, and then we've got our contents element. Again, this is all pre-learned. This is not something that we have to decide on the day. It's all in there. We've got to learn this and put it down on paper quickly. Then the appendices, obviously we've got several choices, but that broadly speaking is more than likely what we would go for in terms of detail within the appendices. So this is simple. Yeah, and you may be looking at this thinking, well, we know this. What are you telling us this for? Well, the reason that I'm telling you is that I've marked, 250 or 300 scripts, and this isn't in there. This isn't in every single one. I'm not talking about 90% of people don't do this, but quite a few don't. Okay, there's something missing. There's no number 7, there's no conclusion, or the calculations aren't in the appendix, or maybe there's no title. I'm not saying that I'm going to get a blank page, but this is simple stuff. T4 isn't about basic stuff, but we've got to get the basics right because the marker is going to assess you on the first thing that you see, or that he sees, or she. So page 2, okay, if we're assuming that this is page 2, we've got an introduction, your report introduction. Now, we'd like to see this in 2 paragraphs. The first paragraph is, a little bit broad. Perhaps we're referring to points within our SWOT analysis. Second paragraph, we're going to have our industry example in there. Now, we do have to twist a little bit, particularly on Power 1. We need to bring in an element of this of the unseen if we can. In fact, we should try to do that. But for me, a lot of this is pre-learned. In other words, we can bring an introduction into the exam with us and maybe just take a little bit of the element of the unseen on the day and stick it in there. But to a large extent, this is rote learning, as is page 1. So for me, there's no excuse for us not to lay out page 1 and page 2 in this way, and in addition to use a good industry example. A good stat, Nick always says, is the best thing to do. And so, if I'm a marker and I see this page 1 and page 2 well laid out, not easy to mark, 2 paragraphs, industry example, I'm immediately thinking, that's good. you know I'm sort of enamored with this person, and it looks like things are sort of have got off to a good start and they're going well. Okay, so now what about a bad example? Okay, now it took me a little bit of a while to find this one. And this example of, in fact, it's of an introduction, and I think the terms of reference are in there as well. But this example has everything in it that you shouldn't do. Everything in it that you shouldn't do. So if you think about what I've just described in terms of the mock exam that I've cut and pasted in terms of what we should do, here you're about to see an actual script, no personal details as I've said, but an actual script that I received, in fact, from a February student who's now passed, by the way, because this particular person listened to the feedback and changed their approach. So here it is. That's it. So when I received the script, what impression do you think I got of this particular person? No introduction whatsoever, let alone an industry example. Now, I'm not saying that this particular person would have done that on the day. I appreciate the time pressures that you're under, but this is what I received. Okay, so my impressions of this student were, to be honest with you, things ain't going well. We're on page 1 or page 2. Things are not going good. What am I in store for on this script? Okay, I'm pretty sure, if I remember offhand, that this student did not pass this exam, this particular mock exam, but this person has passed subsequently. Okay, so the impression that I got, not so good, not so good at all. Okay, so you must start well. A lot of it is rote learning, practicing over and over again. You'll be sick of hearing about doing mock exams, but that's the only way. Mock exams under timed exam conditions. But do you know what? This element of the report, this opening gambit, as it were, page 1 and page 2, a lot of it's rote learning. So it's not like we're having to display higher skills here, or any application skills. So really, on that basis, pardon my directness and my bluntness, but you've got no excuse not to do a good page 1 and page 2. And to boot, if you do that, I can assure you from my experience of marking, if we could talk to your T4 marker, the person's going to mark your script, I can assure you that that person is going to be impressed if you just put a couple of good pages together to kick off with. Okay, so really good luck with your preparation for your T4 exam, and indeed, good luck on the day, and I hope that results go your way, and don't forget about first impressions, because I can assure you they do count.